100. That is how many facts about SpongeBob SquarePants are about to pass through this video. And the reason that number matters is not because of its size. It is because of what the number reveals about the show itself. 100 facts should be difficult to find about a cartoon that premiered on Nickelodeon in 1999 and was, by most surface-level readings, a show about a cheerful sponge who flips burgers. 100 facts should require digging into obscure corners, pulling from dusty interviews, cross-referencing production codes with air dates. And yet, the truth about SpongeBob SquarePants is that 100 is restraint. The show is one of the most densely layered, carefully authored, personally rooted pieces of animation in the history of American television. Every character has an origin that traces back to a real person, a real place, a real moment in the life of a marine science educator who did not set out to create a global phenomenon. He set out to make something he would have wanted to watch as a kid, sitting by the tide pools in Dana Point, California, staring at the creatures under the surface and wondering what their lives were like when nobody was looking. What follows is not a list. It is a story told in facts. Each one connects to the next. Each one changes the way the last one sounds. And by the time the 100th fact lands, the show you thought you knew will look different. Not because the show changed, because you finally saw all the threads that were holding it together. This is Pine Hat. Settle in. There is a lot to get through, and none of it is in a hurry. What you are about to hear is not a countdown. It is not a ranking. It is not a list read aloud with commentary between entries. It is a single, continuous story about how a show got made, who made it, what they gave up along the way, and what they left behind when it was finished. The facts are the architecture. The story is what the architecture holds up. And the story, like the show it describes, is quieter and stranger and sadder than anyone expects it to be. The story of SpongeBob SquarePants begins, as most people know, with a man named Steven Hillenburg. But the version of that story most people carry around in their heads is missing almost everything that makes it remarkable. The broad strokes are familiar. A marine biologist turned animator created a cartoon about a sponge. That sentence is technically accurate. It is also so reductive that it borders on a lie. The real story is slower, stranger, and more personal than the myth. And it starts not in an animation studio, but in an army town in Oklahoma. Hillenburg was born on August 21st, 1961, in Lawton, Oklahoma, on the grounds of Fort Sill, a United States Army post where his father, Kelly N. Hillenburg Jr., was stationed. The family did not stay long. They relocated to Orange County, California, settling in Anaheim, a suburb known primarily for Disneyland and strip malls. It was there, growing up in a landlocked corridor of Southern California, that Hillenburg became obsessed with the ocean. Not in the way children become obsessed with dinosaurs or space, where the fascination burns hot for a season and then gives way to the next fixation. Hillenburg's fascination only deepened. He swam. He scuba dived. He watched Jacques Cousteau documentaries with a focus that bordered on devotion. The kind of attention a child gives to something they do not yet understand is shaping their entire future. And alongside this love of marine life, he drew, constantly, compulsively, on napkins, on margins, on anything flat enough to hold a pencil mark. The two interests, art and the ocean, ran on parallel tracks through his entire childhood, and for a long time, he could not see a way to combine them. Drawing fish, he once admitted, seemed boring to him. The organisms were fascinating. The act of rendering them on paper was not. That changed when he went to college. Hillenburg enrolled at Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, a small town surrounded by redwood forests on the northern coast. He studied natural resource planning with an emphasis on marine resources, graduating in 1984 with a minor in art. The combination is unusual. It is also perfectly Hillenburg. He was not a pure scientist. He was not a pure artist. He was a person who wanted to understand the natural world and then explain it to people who had not yet learned to care about it. That impulse, that specific quality of translating wonder into something accessible, is the engine that powers every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. The show did not come from an animator who liked the ocean. It came from a teacher who loved his students and wanted them to see what he saw. After graduation, Hillenburg joined the Orange County Marine Institute, an organization in Dana Point, California, dedicated to educating the public about marine science and maritime history. He taught there for roughly 3 years. His job was to take groups of visiting children to the tide pools along the coast and show them what lived there. Sea urchins, anemones, starfish, crabs, sponges, the creatures that cling to rocks in the intertidal zone, the narrow band of shoreline that is alternately submerged and exposed as the tides move. Hillenburg loved this work. He has described it with genuine warmth. noting that children are naturally enamored with undersea life, especially with tide pool creatures. But he also recognized something about himself during these years. He was more interested in art than in his chosen profession. The teaching was fulfilling. The science was real. But the part of his brain that lit up most reliably was the part that drew pictures and told stories. While working at the Institute, an educational director asked Hillenburg if he would be interested in creating a comic book about the animal life of tidal pools. He said yes. The result was a hand-drawn, hand-illustrated comic called The Intertidal Zone, completed in 1989. It was not a cartoon. It was an educational tool designed to be used in the classroom, aimed at the same children Hillenburg was guiding through tide pools every week. The comic featured anthropomorphic sea creatures, including 2 co-hosts, a shrimp named Rocky, and a character called Bob the Sponge. Bob did not look like the SpongeBob most people know. He was round, blobby, shaped like an actual sea sponge, and he wore a pair of black sunglasses. He had no arms, no legs. He was simply a talking organism, floating in the corner of each panel, narrating the behavior of the creatures around him. The comic was earnest, educational, and utterly without commercial ambition. Hillenburg tried to get The Intertidal Zone published as a proper comic book. No publisher was interested. The comic was filed away, used occasionally as a teaching aid, and otherwise forgotten. Except it was not forgotten by Hillenburg. He kept the comic. He kept the characters. And somewhere in the back of his mind, during the years that followed, Bob the Sponge kept evolving. Not on paper, not yet, but in the space where ideas live before they become real, the sponge was slowly changing shape. Hold that image for a moment. A man in his late 20s, working at a marine institute on the Southern California coast, drawing pictures of sea creatures for children who visit on field trips, trying to get his comic book published, being told no by every publisher he approaches. There is nothing in this picture that suggests a multi-billion-dollar franchise. There is nothing that suggests a cultural phenomenon that would span 3 decades, 4 theatrical films, a Broadway musical, a species of fungus named after it, and the longest-running children's animated series in American television history. The distance between Bob the Sponge in the Intertidal Zone and SpongeBob SquarePants on a lunchbox in a Tokyo convenience store is so vast that it seems impossible to cross. But Hillenburg crossed it, not by abandoning what he started at the Ocean Institute, by deepening it, by taking the same impulse, the same desire to make children care about sea creatures, and finding a medium that could carry it further than a comic book ever could. The Intertidal Zone is the root system of SpongeBob SquarePants. Every character in the show can be traced back to either the comic or the experience of making it. The narrator who guides children through the tide pools became the French narrator who introduces episodes. The anthropomorphic sea creatures who populated the comic's panels became the residents of Bikini Bottom. The act of teaching, of standing in front of a group of children and making something strange feel familiar, became the show's fundamental mode of communication. SpongeBob SquarePants does not talk down to its audience. It explains, it demonstrates, it shows you something, and then helps you understand why it matters. That is not an entertainment strategy. That is pedagogy. And it comes directly from the years Hillenburg spent at the Ocean Institute, doing exactly the same thing with real children and real tide pools. After leaving the Ocean Institute, as it is now known, Hillenburg made a decision that redirected his entire life. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts in 1989 to study experimental animation. CalArts was, and remains, one of the premier animation schools in the world. Walt Disney himself had helped establish it. The program Hillenburg entered was led by Jules Engel, a legendary animator who had worked on Fantasia and who was known for pushing his students toward abstraction, toward treating animation as a fine art rather than a commercial product. Engel admitted Hillenburg into the program on the strength of The Intertidal Zone. A comic book about tide pool animals, rejected by every publisher who saw it, became the portfolio piece that opened the door to a career in animation. While at CalArts, Hillenburg made 2 short films that would prove important. The first was called The Green Beret, a silly cartoon about a Girl Scout with enormous fists trying to sell cookies. It was broad, physical comedy, the kind of thing that telegraphs an animator's comfort with exaggeration and timing. The second film was different. It was called Wormholes, and it was a philosophical piece based on Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Wormholes was screened at animation festivals around the world, and it won an award for Best Concept at the Ottawa International Animation Festival. The range between the 2 films is revealing. Hillenburg could do slapstick. He could also do cerebral, concept-driven animation that engaged with ideas most people associate with physics textbooks. not cartoons. The ability to move between those two registers, to be silly and serious in the same breath, would become the defining quality of SpongeBob SquarePants. But that was still years away. At the Ottawa Festival, Hillenburg met a man named Joe Murray. Murray was in the process of developing a new animated series for Nickelodeon called Rocko's Modern Life. He was impressed by Hillenburg's work, by the range and the confidence of it, and he offered him a job. Hillenburg accepted. He joined Rocko's Modern Life as a director and writer, working on the show for its entire run from 1993 to 1996, eventually rising to the position of creative director during the fourth and final season. And this is where the next layer of the SpongeBob origin becomes essential, because Rocko's Modern Life was not just a job for Hillenburg. It was a laboratory, a petri dish, a place where the people who would build SpongeBob SquarePants first learned what they were capable of. The roster is remarkable. Tom Kenny, who would become the voice of SpongeBob, voiced the character Heifer Wolf on Rocko's Modern Life. Mr. Lawrence, who would become the voice of Plankton, was a writer. Derek Dryman, who would become SpongeBob's creative director, was a storyboard artist. Nick Jennings, who would design SpongeBob's visual world, was an art director. Nicholas Carr, who would compose SpongeBob's music, handled the sound. Dan Povenmire, who would later co-create Phineas and Ferb for Disney, was a storyboard artist and writer. Meriwether Williams, who would become one of SpongeBob's most prolific writers, was there. The list goes on. Kenny later described the Rocko's Modern Life crew as being like Professor X's School for Mutants. It was a first gig for many of them, and the sensibility they developed there, the balance of absurdist humor and genuine emotion, the willingness to treat cartoon characters as if they had real inner lives, carried directly into everything they made afterward. One day during production on Rocko's Modern Life, a writer named Martin Olson found pages from the intertitle zone. He read them, he liked them, and he told Hillenburg something that would change the trajectory of American animation forever. He should turn this comic into a television series. Hillenburg had not even considered creating his own show. He had watched Joe Murray tear his hair out, dealing with the pressures and politics of running a series, and he had decided he would never want to subject himself to the same ordeal. But Olson's encouragement planted a seed, and by 1994, after years of working on other people's shows and other people's characters, Hillenburg was beginning to develop some of the creatures from the intertitle zone into something entirely new. There is a specific episode of Rocko's Modern Life that foreshadows what was coming. In the third season, Hillenburg co-wrote and directed an episode called Fish and Chumps, in which Rocko, Heifer, and Filbert go on a fishing trip, oblivious to the fact that a pair of anthropomorphic sea creatures are attempting to catch them from underwater. The episode inverts the usual relationship between land and sea. The fish are the protagonists. The humans, or in this case the anthropomorphic land animals, are the threat. Hillenburg was already thinking underwater. He was already building a world where the creatures beneath the surface had their own lives, their own dramas, their own reasons for being afraid of what was above them. Fish and Chumps is not SpongeBob SquarePants, but it is the shadow of SpongeBob SquarePants, cast backward onto a different show, visible only in retrospect. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The character at the center of this new project was still, in the earliest stages, called Bob the Sponge. Hillenburg knew he wanted to build a show around a single main character, a departure from the buddy comedy formula that dominated cartoons of the era. Shows like The Ren and Stimpy Show were built on pairs. Hillenburg wanted something different. He wanted the weirdest sea creature he could think of as his protagonist, and the sponge won. The sponge was, in Hillenburg's reasoning, the ideal candidate. It was funny. It was strange. It was the most elastic, changing, plastic creature in the ocean, capable of reshaping itself in ways that lent themselves perfectly to animation. And there was something else. Something Hillenburg did not articulate as directly, but that permeates every episode of the show. The sponge, in nature, is sedentary. It attaches itself to a rock and sits there, filter feeding, for the rest of its life. The comedy of SpongeBob SquarePants comes from taking this fundamentally passive creature and giving it the most relentlessly active personality imaginable. The gap between what a sponge is and what SpongeBob is contains the show's entire emotional range. But the design was a problem. Bob the Sponge looked like what he was, a real sea sponge, round, lumpy, organic. Hillenburg initially stuck with this design because it was biologically correct. and his instinct as a marine science teacher was to honor the science. But then he drew the character as a square, not a sea sponge, a kitchen sponge. Rectangular, bright yellow, with a face and limbs and a pair of square brown pants. And the moment he saw it, he knew the design was right. The square shape was funnier. It was more recognizable. It was easier to animate. And crucially, it matched the character's personality. Hillenburg described it later as a square personality, nerdy, oddball, slightly rigid, in ways that contrast with the organic chaos of the world around him. The decision to abandon biological accuracy in favor of comedic design was not a compromise. It was the moment the character became himself. There was a consequence to the square shape, though, one that Hillenburg did not anticipate. He kept SpongeBob's parents as actual sea sponges, round and lumpy and organic looking. This means that SpongeBob, within the show's own visual logic, does not look like his own parents. He is a kitchen sponge, born to see sponges. The show has never explained this. It has never even acknowledged it as unusual. And in a strange way, that silence says something important about the world Hillenburg was building. Bikini Bottom is a place where things do not need to be explained. They simply are. The rules are not hidden. They are absent. And the absence of rules is what allows the show to do anything it wants. There is a related design detail that most people have never thought about. SpongeBob's shape, his rectangular body with the flat sides and the sharp corners, means that he interacts with space differently than any other character in the show. He fits into things. He slides through things. He can be folded, stretched, compressed, and reassembled. The sponge's physical elasticity, which Hillenburg deliberately chose for its animation potential, is not just a visual gag. It is a metaphor for the character's psychology. SpongeBob adapts. He absorbs. He takes whatever shape the situation requires, and then springs back to his original form when it is over. The other characters in the show are more rigid, more fixed in their identities and their behaviors. Squidward is always Squidward. Mr. Krabs is always Mr. Krabs. But SpongeBob bends. He bends around every obstacle, every insult, every disappointment, and he comes back to center every time. The character's physical design and his emotional design are the same design. That is not an accident. That is a marine biologist who understood that the most resilient organisms in the ocean are the ones that give way to pressure instead of resisting it. The show, at this early stage, was going to be called SpongeBoy Ahoy. The main character was SpongeBoy, no last name. Hillenburg liked the simplicity of it. He began developing the world around this character in earnest, working with Derek Dryman at Hillenburg's house several times a week. They sketched characters. They mapped relationships. They built the geography of Bikini Bottom, deciding where each character would live, what the streets would look like, what the restaurants and schools and landmarks would be. On weekends, Tom Kenny would sometimes join them, performing audio tests as SpongeBoy, while Hillenburg voiced the other characters into a tape recorder. These were not formal sessions. They were friends sitting around a house, playing with ideas, recording what made them laugh, and then, in 1997, after voice acting for the original 7-minute pilot had already been recorded, Nickelodeon's legal department discovered a problem. The name SpongeBoy was already trademarked. Some sources identify the product as a mop. Others say it was a line of pencils. The exact product varies depending on who is telling the story, and the discrepancy has never been definitively resolved. But the outcome was the same regardless. Hillenburg had to change the name. The pilot had already been recorded. The dialogue had already been performed. Everything that referenced SpongeBoy had to be redone. It was November 1997, and a show that was not yet a show had already lost its name. Hillenburg was not rattled. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. The new name still had to contain the word sponge. If it did not, he feared that viewers, especially children, would look at the yellow rectangular character on their screen and mistake him for a piece of cheese. This was not an abstract concern. The character's square shape already made him look less like a sponge and more like a block of cheddar. The word sponge in the name was the anchor that kept the audience oriented. He considered options, and then he settled on SpongeBob. For the last name, he chose SquarePants, a reference to the character's square shape and to the brown square pants that were already part of the design. Tom Kenny has recalled that when he first saw a picture of the character, he remarked something to the effect of, "Look at this sponge in square pants," thinking he can get a job in a fast food place. Hillenburg loved how the phrase sounded. It had, in his words, a nice ring to it, and more importantly, it reinforced the character's nerdiness, which was central to the whole concept. SpongeBob SquarePants. The name sounds like the kind of thing a child would invent, which is exactly why it works. It is specific enough to be memorable and absurd enough to be funny, and it contains within it the character's entire identity. A sponge who wears square pants and does not see anything unusual about either of those things. By the summer of 1997, Hillenburg was ready to pitch the show to Nickelodeon. And this is where one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of television pitches took place. Most pitches are PowerPoint presentations, binders with character sketches and plot summaries, maybe a short animatic or a verbal walkthrough of the pilot episode. Hillenburg did none of these things. He created an experience. He spent weeks painstakingly crafting a miniature version of the Bikini Bottom set, complete with small, squeezable models of the characters, all housed inside a large terrarium that he covered with a sheet and wheeled into the meeting room. He and Derek Dryman each put on a garish Hawaiian shirt. They brought a boombox loaded with Hawaiian music. They even brought the Tiny Tim song that would play during the pilot's climax, "Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight," to play for the executives during the pitch. The crew, as Dryman later recalled, went all out because they believed the pilot would only be accepted if the executives laughed. It was a bet on comedy. Everything about the presentation was designed to communicate the tone of the show before a single frame of animation had been screened. When the Nickelodeon executives entered the room, Hillenburg pulled back the sheet, revealing the terrarium, and started the music. Eric Coleman, the vice president of animation development, described the setup as pretty amazing. But the word that keeps coming up in every account of that day is laughter. Kevin Kay and Albie Hecht, two of the other executives present, had to step outside the room because they were exhausted from laughing. They did not step outside to discuss the pitch. They stepped outside because they physically could not stop laughing and needed to collect themselves. Dryman expected them to fly back to New York and deliberate for weeks, which is the normal timeline for network decisions. Instead, they came back into the room in what seemed like minutes and said they wanted to make it. The crew was given money and 2 weeks to write the pilot. Nickelodeon president Sima Zargami was one of 4 executives in the room when the pilot was eventually screened, and she recalled that their immediate reaction was to see it again, both because they liked it and it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. That phrase, "unlike anything they had ever seen before," is telling. Nickelodeon had been in the cartoon business for years. They had launched Rugrats, Hey Arnold, The Wild Thornberrys, Cat Dog. They knew what animated shows looked like. And what Hillenburg brought them did not look like any of those things. It was stranger, quieter in some ways, and louder in others. The humor was not based on pop culture references or catchphrases. It was based on character, on the gap between who these creatures thought they were and who they actually were. On the specific comedy of a sponge who treats fry cooking as a sacred vocation. The pilot was titled Help Wanted. It is, on the surface, the simplest possible premise. SpongeBob applies for a job at a fast food restaurant called the Krusty Krab. The owner, Mr. Krabs, does not want to hire him. The cashier, Squidward, actively tries to sabotage the process. SpongeBob is sent on a fool's errand to find a spatula that does not exist, while a horde of anchovies descends on the restaurant, overwhelming the 2-person staff. SpongeBob returns just in time, armed with a spatula and a level of fry cooking skill that borders on the supernatural, and saves the day. Mr. Krabs hires him. Squidward is dismayed. Patrick, who has been standing outside the whole time providing moral support, wanders in at the end and orders a Krabby Patty. The simplicity of the premise is deceptive. What Help Wanted actually does in 8 minutes is construct a complete social ecosystem. It establishes not just who the characters are, but how they relate to each other, what they want, what they fear, and what they are willing to do when those wants and fears collide. SpongeBob wants approval. Squidward wants solitude. Mr. Krabs wants money. Patrick wants nothing, which is its own kind of want. And the episode resolves not through conflict, but through competence. SpongeBob does not argue his way into the job. He does not trick anyone. He does not win a contest or pass a test. He simply does the work, and the work is so good that it overrides every objection. That is the show's thesis statement, delivered in the first 8 minutes of its existence. Sincerity and competence, applied without irony, can overcome hostility, indifference, and institutional resistance. It is a deeply optimistic premise. It is also, if you think about it for more than a few seconds, a deeply sad one. Because the show that follows this pilot will spend the next 25 years demonstrating that SpongeBob's sincerity and competence do not, in fact, reliably overcome anything. He keeps getting exploited, he keeps getting underpaid, he keeps getting ignored, and he keeps showing up anyway because he loves the work, because the work is the only thing that has never let him down. The episode is 8 minutes long, not the standard 11. This is because Help Wanted was produced as a standalone pilot before a full season was ordered, and it was shorter than a typical episode would be. To fill the remaining 3 minutes of the half-hour slot, the crew created a second segment called Reef Blower, but the 8 minutes of Help Wanted contain every relationship, every tension, every tonal register that the show would explore for the next quarter century. SpongeBob is nervous, but determined. Patrick is supportive, but useless. Squidward is hostile, but trapped. Mr. Krabs is greedy, but practical. The resolution is not that SpongeBob is rewarded for being the best. The resolution is that SpongeBob's sincerity, his genuine love of cooking, proves to be exactly what the situation requires. It is a thesis statement disguised as a cartoon, and it landed. The storyboard for Help Wanted was finalized on June 3rd, 1997. The recording script had been completed weeks earlier, on May 12th. The final master was delivered to Nickelodeon Animation Studio on September 18th, 1997. But the episode did not air until May 1st, 1999, following the television broadcast of the Kids' Choice Awards. The gap between completion and broadcast was nearly 2 years. During that time, the pilot was screened internally, recut for broadcast, paired with the newly produced theme song sequence, and given the retroactive production code number 127. It premiered with 6.9 million total viewers, including 3.6 million children aged 2 to 11. The official series debut came later, on July 17, 1999, with the episode Bubble Stand paired with Ripped Pants. And just like that, SpongeBob SquarePants existed in the world. The 2-year gap between the pilot's completion and its broadcast is itself a fact worth sitting with. For nearly 2 years, SpongeBob SquarePants existed as a finished piece of work that nobody outside of Nickelodeon had seen. The characters were drawn, the voices were recorded, the music was laid in, the story was told, and it sat on a shelf, waiting. During that time, Hillenburg and his team were producing the rest of the first season, building out the world that the pilot had introduced, writing and storyboarding episodes that would flesh out the relationships between characters who, in the pilot, had only just met each other. They were building a house around a foundation that the public had not yet seen. When the show finally aired, it did not feel like a debut. It felt like a discovery, as if Bikini Bottom had always been there, and the audience was just now being allowed to visit. The premiere was strategically placed. Nickelodeon aired it immediately following the 1999 Kids' Choice Awards, one of the network's highest-rated annual events. This was not a common practice. Very few new series received the privilege of a post-awards lead-in. The fact that Nickelodeon gave this slot to SpongeBob tells you how much confidence the network had in the show. They were not testing it. They were launching it. But there is one more detail about the pilot that almost nobody knows, and it reveals something important about the economics of children's television in the late 1990s. Help Wanted was not included on the complete first season DVD when that set was released on October 28, 2003. The first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants was missing from its own first season collection. The reason was not creative. It was not a quality issue. It was financial. The episode features the song Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight by Tiny Tim during its climactic sequence. And Nickelodeon did not want to pay Tiny Tim's estate for the copyright clearance. According to Derek Dryman, the network simply decided that the cost of licensing the song was not worth paying for a single bonus episode on a DVD set. The pilot was eventually included as a bonus feature on the complete third season DVD, released on September 27th, 2005, and later restored to its proper place on the first 100 episode set. But for over 2 years, anyone who bought the first season of SpongeBob SquarePants on DVD received a collection that started with the second episode. The show's origin was missing from its own archive, because of a song by a ukulele player who had died in 1996. Think about what that means for a moment. The entry point to one of the most significant animated series in television history was held hostage by a copyright dispute over a novelty recording from 1968. That is not a small detail. That is the kind of fact that reveals the machinery behind the art, the invisible web of legal agreements and financial calculations that determines what audiences are allowed to see and when. Help Wanted was not hidden because it was bad. It was hidden because it was expensive, and the show kept running anyway, accumulating millions of new fans who had never seen the episode where it all began. The second segment that aired on May 1st, 1999, alongside Help Wanted, carries its own hidden story. Reef Blower is a nearly dialogue-free, short, lasting 2 minutes and 50 seconds. It is the shortest episode in the show's entire history. SpongeBob uses a leaf blower, reimagined as an underwater reef blower, to clean his front yard after Squidward kicks a small shell onto it. The situation escalates. The reef blower malfunctions. SpongeBob sucks up the entire ocean. The ocean comes back. The shell lands on Squidward's nose. The end. For years, a popular piece of trivia circulated online claiming that Reef Blower was originally meant to have voice acting, but faulty recording equipment at the studio forced the crew to make the episode silent at the last minute. This story appeared on IMDb's trivia page for the episode. It spread through fan communities and message boards. It was repeated in articles and listicles and YouTube videos. It became one of those facts that everyone knows. The kind of trivia that gets passed from person to person so often that questioning it feels unnecessary. But it was not true. The entire story was a myth. Storyboard artist Jay Linder debunked the legend directly on social media when a fan asked him about it. The real reason Reef Blower has no spoken dialogue is entirely practical. The segment was created to extend Help Wanted to a full half show, but because Help Wanted and Reef Blower were separate productions, Screen Actors Guild rules required paying the voice actors a second set of session fees. Jay Linder recalled that this would have been around $2,500 total at the time of production, for a segment that was less than 3 minutes long and existed purely to pad the runtime. The math did not work, so the crew made it silent. The storyboards for Reef Blower contain no reference to dialogue anywhere, confirming that it was always intended to be wordless. The only vocal element in the entire short is SpongeBob mouthing the word "you," which appears as a caption on the screen, plus a brief growl and a gasp from Squidward. Even those were minimal enough to avoid triggering the full session fee. The original storyboards tell a different story from the finished episode in another way as well. According to the 1996 Pitch Bible, Reef Blower was originally conceived with a completely different plot. In the original version, Patrick appeared alongside SpongeBob, imitating him with a reef blower of his own. The final version strips the cast down to just SpongeBob and Squidward, making it the most minimal episode in the show's history. 2 characters, 1 location, no words. And it works. It works because the physical comedy is precise, because the escalation follows a clean logic, and because the relationship between SpongeBob and Squidward is so well established, even in this earliest stage of the show, that the audience understands everything without a single line of dialogue. The constraint, the silence imposed by a $2,500 union fee, became one of the most distinctive episodes in the series. That pattern repeats across the early history of SpongeBob SquarePants. Constraints produce invention. Limitations become features. A copyright dispute hides the pilot. A union rule creates a silent episode. The show's original title gets torpedoed by a mop trademark. And every time, the creative team finds a solution that is not just adequate, but superior to what they would have produced without the constraint. The Pineapple House, the Lobster Trap Restaurant, the Terrarium Pitch with Hawaiian shirts and squeezable models. These are not the products of unlimited resources. They are the products of people who cared deeply about what they were making and refused to let obstacles become excuses. There is a broader pattern here that applies to animation in general, but applies to SpongeBob SquarePants with particular force. The best animated shows are almost never the ones with the biggest budgets or the fewest restrictions. They are the ones where the restrictions force the creators to think differently, to find solutions that a team with more money or more freedom would never have discovered. The silence of Reef Blower is more memorable than any dialogue scene in the first season. The absence of the pilot from the first season DVD created a mythology around Help Wanted that made it more famous, not less. The loss of the name SpongeBoy produced a name that is funnier, more distinctive, and more culturally durable than SpongeBoy Ahoy could ever have been. Each limitation was a gift disguised as a problem. And Hillenburg, who had spent years teaching children to see beauty in creatures that most people step over without looking down, was uniquely equipped to recognize gifts in unexpected forms. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The theme song of SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in television history. It has been performed at university marching band halftime shows. It has been translated into Yiddish by Judaic scholar Eddie Portnoy. It has been used as walk-up music by Major League Baseball player Oscar Gonzalez, who explained that kids love that song, and this is a kid's game after all. Russian ground forces members have been filmed marching to it, and almost nothing about its creation is widely known. The melody was composed by Mark Harrison and Blaze Smith. The lyrics were written by Stephen Hillenburg and Derek Dryman. The song is a sea shanty, adapted from the traditional tune Blow the Man Down, a maritime folk song that dates back to at least the 19th century and was originally sung by sailors aboard merchant ships. Hillenburg chose this form deliberately. He did not want a pop theme song. He did not want something that sounded like a jingle. He wanted the opening to feel like something a pirate would sing, not a modern pirate, an old one, the kind that lived in oil paintings and spoke in language that sounded like scripture. Drymon has recalled that Hillenburg's stated goal was to make the most annoying song possible, which is a joke, but not entirely a joke. The song is deliberately simple, deliberately repetitive, deliberately loud. It is designed to be impossible to forget, and it succeeds at that so completely that most people who have heard it even once can sing it from memory decades later. The opening sequence features a character called Painty the Pirate, an oil painting of a pirate who sings the theme song's call and response with a chorus of children. The voice of Painty is provided by Patrick Penny, a veteran voice actor known for his work with Hanna-Barbera Productions. Penny had no other roles in the SpongeBob SquarePants series. His entire contribution to the franchise is the theme song. He sings it, and then he disappears from the show's credits for the rest of the episode, every episode, for over 25 years. But the painting itself has a deeper origin, one that connects the theme song to the same DIY aesthetic that characterized the show's entire early production. The pirate portrait used in the opening sequence was inspired by an item Hillenburg found at a thrift store. He saw the painting, liked the absurdity of a pirate rendered in formal oil painting style, and decided to build the show's entire opening around it. The painting became the frame. The sea shanty became the song. And then Hillenburg did something that most viewers have never noticed. He superimposed his own lips onto the painting. The mouth that moves in sync with the opening words of every SpongeBob episode. The mouth that says, "Are you ready, kids?" belongs to Stephen Hillenburg himself. His lips, his movement, composited onto a thrift store painting of a pirate. Tom Kenny once joked that those lips are the closest fans will ever come to seeing Hillenburg, given how private the creator was. It is a small, almost invisible detail, but once you know it, the opening of every episode changes. Every time the show begins, the first thing the audience sees is its creator, hiding in plain sight inside a painting he bought at a secondhand store. He is right there, in front of everyone, and nobody knows it is him. That tension between visibility and invisibility, between creation and anonymity, runs through Hillenburg's entire relationship with SpongeBob SquarePants. He built the show. He shaped every detail of its world, and then he stepped back, so far back that even the fans who loved the show most intensely did not know what he looked like. The opening lines of the theme song carry their own hidden origin. According to the encyclopedia SpongeBobia, the words that Painty sings before the children join in were derived from lines that Hillenburg used to say to children when he worked at the Orange County Marine Institute. Part of his job involved dressing up as a sailor and greeting visiting students in character, using theatrical maritime language, the kind of exaggerated pirate speak that children respond to with delight. Are you ready, kids? That question is not just a catchphrase. It is a teacher standing in front of his class, dressed in a costume, making sure they are paying attention before the lesson begins. The theme song is not a commercial introduction. It is the echo of a real moment from Hillenburg's life. the moment before he started teaching, when he checked to see if his students were listening. The live-action footage of the island that appears in the opening sequence, the tiny island with 3 palm trees sitting in the middle of the ocean, was also a Hillenburg production. According to the audio commentary for the Christmas special Christmas Who, Hillenburg filmed those shots of the miniature island in a friend's pool. The island was a model, small enough to sit in a swimming pool, filmed from angles that made it look as though it were floating in an actual ocean. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, Tom Kenny revealed the identity of the specific friend whose pool was used: Jendi Tartakovsky, the creator of Dexter's Laboratory, Samurai Jack, and Primal, 2 of the most influential animators of the late 1990s and early 2000s, connected by a backyard pool and a miniature island. The original model island eventually ended up in a storage facility that Hillenburg rented for items he did not have room for in his house. Starting with later seasons, the live-action footage was replaced by a CGI model because the original had not aged well. The music that plays underneath every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants is itself one of the show's most distinctive and least understood elements. It is not composed the way most television music is composed. It does not sound like most television music sounds. And its origins are rooted in a creative decision that Hillenburg made in the first season. A decision that would give SpongeBob its unique sonic identity for the rest of the show's run. Most animated series commission original scores from a single composer or a small team. SpongeBob does something different. The show's music editor and primary composer is Nicholas Carr, who had worked with Hillenburg on Rocko's Modern Life. After Rocko ended, Carr found himself in a difficult position. He struggled to find work in his field. He was seriously considering leaving the industry entirely, abandoning music in favor of some other career, when Hillenburg called and offered him a role on a new show he was developing. That phone call saved Carr's career, and the music Carr brought to SpongeBob would become one of the show's most defining characteristics. For the first season, the show's score drew primarily from the Associated Production Music Library, commonly known as APM. This is a massive archive of pre-recorded tracks created by composers around the world that is licensed for use in film, television, commercials, and other media. The APM library contains over 1 million tracks, spanning decades of recording. Some of the tracks in the library date back to the early 20th century. Carr has described the APM library's catalog as containing lots of great old corny Hawaiian music and big, full, dramatic orchestral scores. The decision to use library music rather than custom compositions was Hillenburg's, and it was inspired by his experience on Rocko's Modern Life, which had also drawn from the APM library. But where Rocko's use of library music was relatively restrained, Hillenburg pushed it further. He wanted the music to be as funny and ridiculous as possible, as Carr later recalled. The result is a show whose soundtrack oscillates wildly between cheerful ukulele strumming, ominous orchestral stings that sound like they belong in a horror film, jaunty big band numbers from the 1940s, and Hawaiian steel guitar tunes that evoke tiki bars and beach resorts. The tonal range is enormous. The effect is disorienting in exactly the right way. The music tells you how to feel about a scene, but it tells you in a voice that is slightly off, slightly too enthusiastic, slightly too dramatic, as if the show's own soundtrack is performing a gentle parody of itself. The individual tracks that became SpongeBob's signatures are, in most cases, recordings that existed long before the show. The ukulele version of 12th Street Rag that plays during title cards. The ominous grass skirt chase that accompanies moments of panic. The gentle Hawaiian steel guitar of Aloha Oe that scores farewell scenes. These are not custom compositions. They are library tracks, created by musicians who in many cases never knew their work would end up on the most popular animated series on television. Some of the same tracks have appeared in The Simpsons, Ren and Stimpy, Bill Nye, The Science Guy, and The X Factor. The library is shared, but the way SpongeBob uses it, the specific combination and sequencing and emotional context is unique. There is something almost archaeological about the way SpongeBob's music works. The show reaches into a catalog of recordings that span decades, pulls out a track composed for a completely different purpose, and places it in a context that transforms its meaning entirely. A piece of Hawaiian lounge music, composed in the 1960s for use in a travel documentary, becomes the soundtrack to SpongeBob's Walk to Work. A dramatic orchestral sting composed for a thriller becomes the musical punctuation for Mr. Krabs discovering that he has been overcharged by a penny. The music was not made for SpongeBob, but SpongeBob was made for the music, in the sense that the show's entire tonal register, its ability to shift instantly between comedy and drama, between warmth and menace, between the mundane and the epic, is enabled by the range of the library it draws from. A custom score would have a consistent voice. The APM library gives SpongeBob 100 voices, and the show uses every one of them. Carr has described his process of selecting music for each episode as a form of curation rather than composition. He is not writing the music. He is finding it. He listens to thousands of tracks and identifies the ones that will transform a particular scene from a drawing with dialogue into a moment with feeling. The right piece of library music, placed at the right point in an episode, can make a joke land harder, can make a sad moment feel earned, can make a chase scene feel genuinely urgent. The wrong piece can flatten everything. Carr's ear for this, his ability to match the emotional frequency of a scene to a piece of music that was composed decades earlier for a completely different purpose, is one of the most underappreciated creative contributions to the show's success. For competition-based episodes, Carr even drew from Sam Spence's NFL Films music library, using tracks like A Golden Boy Again for episodes such as the Fry Cook Games. The choice to score a cartoon cooking competition with the same music used for professional football highlights is, in itself, a joke. But it is a joke that only works because the music is real. It is not a parody of sports music. It is actual sports music, repurposed. And the sincerity of the original recording is what makes the absurdity of its new context funny. Hillenburg did not want SpongeBob to rely on the APM library forever. He felt it was important for the series to develop its own proprietary music catalog, consisting of original scores that could be reused and re-edited throughout the years. He wanted these scores composed by unknowns, by musicians who had no established reputation in the industry, because he believed that unknown composers would bring a freshness and a willingness to experiment that established professionals might not. He assembled a group of 12 such composers. They formed a collective called the Sponge Divers Orchestra, which includes Carr and Steve Belfer, the musician who wrote and performed the specific piece of music heard during the end credits of every episode. This group went on to provide the majority of the music for later seasons, building a library of original compositions that sits alongside the vintage APM tracks. The result is a show whose sonic landscape is layered in a way that most viewers never consciously process. They hear it, they feel it. They associate certain emotions with certain sounds, but they do not know which tracks are 60-year-old library recordings from a Hawaiian music archive and which were written specifically for the show by a group of musicians Hillenburg recruited because nobody else would hire them. One track from the APM library has become more famous than anyone involved in its creation could have anticipated. Sweet Victory, the power ballad that plays during the climactic scene of the Season 2 episode Band Geeks, was co-written in 1997 by David Glenn Isley, a veteran hard rock singer who had fronted the bands Jufria and Dirty White Boy in the 1980s, and Bob Kulick, a guitarist who had worked with artists including Lou Reed and Kiss. The song was released in 1998 on APM Music's Bruton Music Library album American Games. It was production music. It was never meant to be heard by a mass audience. It was filed in a catalog alongside thousands of other tracks, designed to be licensed by television producers who needed a song that sounded like an arena rock anthem. The SpongeBob production team found Sweet Victory while searching the APM library for a song that could sell the emotional climax of Band Geeks, the moment when Squidward's ragtag collection of terrible musicians, who have spent the entire episode failing at everything, somehow coalesce into a flawless rock band and perform a triumphant concert at the Bubble Bowl. The scene needed a song that felt genuinely victorious, not a parody of victory, but the real thing, played straight, with no irony. Sweet Victory was that song, and its use in the episode transformed it from an obscure library track into one of the most beloved songs in internet culture. Isley later described the experience of discovering that his song had been used on SpongeBob. His daughter, about 8 years old at the time, came running into the living room yelling that the sponge was singing, and it was his voice. Isley watched the episode with her and scratched his head. It was, in his words, pretty bizarre to see that little yellow guy perform so passionately with his voice. Funny, but kind of startling at the same time. After Hillenburg's death in November 2018, a petition gathered nearly 600,000 signatures requesting that Sweet Victory be performed at Super Bowl 53, which was held in February 2019. The petition was, in a sense, a tribute to Hillenburg and to the show's cultural reach. PM Music donated a portion of the song's revenues to the ALS Association in Hillenburg's honor. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And then there is Ween. The connection between SpongeBob SquarePants and the experimental rock band Ween is one of the most surprising and least discussed creative relationships in the show's history, and it reaches deeper than most people who know about it realize. In 1997, the same year Hillenburg pitched SpongeBob to Nickelodeon, Ween released their 6th studio album, The Mollusk. The album is a concept album built around themes of maritime adventure, nautical mystique, and underwater strangeness. Its cover, designed by legendary graphic artist Storm Thorgerson, who is best known for creating Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon artwork, depicted a large sea monster composed of a fish, a shrimp, and an octopus. The songs on The Mollusk range from genuinely beautiful ocean-themed ballads to warped, distorted, psychedelic pieces that sound like transmissions from the bottom of the sea. The two founding members of Ween, Aaron Freeman and Mickey Melchiondo, performing as Gene and Dean Ween, have called it their favorite album. Hillenburg heard The Mollusk shortly after its release. Something about the album connected with what he was already building: the nautical theme, the blend of sincerity and absurdity, the way the album could be beautiful and ridiculous in the same song, treating the ocean as both a real place and a surreal dreamscape. The Mollusk became, by Hillenburg's own account, one of the major inspirations for SpongeBob SquarePants. The connection is audible. The modulated, pitch-shifted voice on the album's standout track, Mutilated Lips, sounds so close to SpongeBob's voice that first-time listeners sometimes believe Ween copied the show. But The Mollusk was released in 1997. SpongeBob did not premiere until 1999. The influence ran in the opposite direction. Hillenburg contacted the band after hearing the album and discussed the basic ideas for his show with them. He also commissioned a song. Dean Ween later recalled the conversation in a Facebook post following Hillenburg's death. He wrote that he got a call a long time ago from a marine biologist who said he wanted to start a cartoon inspired by Ween's album, The Mollusk. His name was Steve Hillenburg, and his idea was to create a Bugs Bunny-type cartoon on the bottom of the ocean floor. Ween had been on tour for a long year, and they ended up recording and writing the commissioned song in one night at Greg Frey's studio. The song was called Loop de Loop, and its purpose was simple: to teach children how to tie their shoes. They wrote it fast, mailed it back on Christmas Eve, and the SpongeBob team's response was immediate. They said, "Do not change anything about it. It is perfect." Loop de Loop appeared in the Season 2 episode, Your Shoes Untied, which aired on February 17th, 2001. In the episode, SpongeBob forgets how to tie his shoes. After an extended sequence of physical comedy built around his inability to walk without tripping, his pet snail Gary reveals a record player hidden under his shell and plays the song. It is a moment of pure, unironic sweetness in a show that is often described as absurdist. The song teaches you how to tie your shoes. It does not make fun of the process. It does not wink at the audience. It just teaches, in the same way Hillenburg used to teach children about tide pool animals. The connection between SpongeBob and the intertidal zone and the Orange County Marine Institute is, in that moment, completely transparent. What makes the Ween connection so revealing is not the songs themselves, but what they tell you about Hillenburg's creative process. He did not draw inspiration from other cartoons. He did not model SpongeBob after existing animated series, or borrow from the playbook of shows that had already proven successful. He listened to an experimental rock album about the ocean and heard something in it that matched the show he was building in his head. He called the band directly, not through an agent or a network liaison, but personally, one artist reaching out to another because their work resonated. He commissioned a song to teach children how to tie their shoes, and the band wrote it in a single night, and it was perfect. The entire relationship between SpongeBob and Ween operates on a frequency that the entertainment industry does not usually accommodate. Genuine, unself-conscious, creative kinship between people working in completely different mediums who recognized something in each other's work that nobody else saw. The Ween connection deepened in 2004, when the band's song Ocean Man, also from the Mollusk album, played over the closing credits of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. It was the album's influence coming full circle. A movie about a sponge, inspired in part by an album about the ocean, closing with the same album's most transcendent track. The moment Ocean Man begins playing over the end credits, as the animated characters give way to scrolling text, the audience is hearing the sound of two creative visions that found each other across the gap between indie rock and children's television and recognized something shared. The album came first. The show came second. The movie brought them together for the final time. Dean Ween wrote that the SpongeBob connection remains one of their proudest legacies, and that they went on to do a lot of work together with SpongeBob. After Hillenburg's death on November 26, 2018, Ween honored him at a concert at the Met in Philadelphia on December 14th, performing Loop de Loop and Ocean Man as part of their encore. It was only the second time the band had ever played Loop de Loop live. The song had been written in a single night nearly 2 decades earlier, mailed on Christmas Eve, and declared perfect by a marine biologist who was building something nobody else could see yet. And now, the marine biologist was gone, and the song outlived him, and the band played it for a room full of people who knew exactly what it meant. The voice cast of SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most stable ensembles in television history, with the core performers remaining essentially unchanged for over 2 decades. In an industry where voice actors are routinely replaced, recast, or rotated out as shows evolve, SpongeBob's principal cast has stayed together from the pilot to the present day. Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbakke, Roger Bumpass, Clancy Brown, Mr. Lawrence, Carolyn Lawrence, Lori Allen, Mary Jo Catlett, and Jill Talley have all been voicing their respective characters since those characters were created. Some of them were there before the show had a name. Some of them were there before SpongeBob was SpongeBob. The stability of the cast is not merely a contractual arrangement. It is a creative choice that has consequences for the show's identity. When a voice actor stays with a character for decades, the character begins to absorb the actor's own aging, their evolving vocal range, their deepening relationship with the material. The SpongeBob of 2024 does not sound exactly like the SpongeBob of 1999. And part of the reason is that Tom Kenny is not the same person he was in 1999. He is older. His voice has changed in the subtle ways that all voices change over time, and those changes have become part of the character. SpongeBob has aged, not in the show's timeline, where he remains perpetually the same, but in the texture of his voice, in the way he sounds to an audience that has been listening for 25 years. That is something only a stable cast can produce. A replacement actor would reset the clock. The continuity of performance creates a continuity of feeling that transcends the individual episodes, and the story of how each actor found their character is more personal, more accidental, and more deeply connected to the show's DNA than most people realize. Tom Kenny, who voices SpongeBob, first used the voice that would become the characters for a minor role on Rocko's Modern Life. The character was a female alligator named Al, who appeared briefly in a single episode. Kenny used the voice once, in a throwaway performance for a background character, and then forgot about it entirely. He had no reason to remember it. It was one of dozens of minor voices he performed during his time on Rocko's. But Hillenburg remembered when he was developing SpongeBob and searching for a voice that would capture the character's specific quality, that blend of childlike enthusiasm and adult persistence. He knew what he wanted. He had heard it before. He approached Kenny about voicing SpongeBob, but Kenny had forgotten how to perform the voice. It had been years. The muscles, the placement, the specific resonance of it were gone. So Hillenburg played him a video clip from the Rocko's Modern Life episode where Al appeared. Kenny watched it, and the moment he heard his own forgotten voice coming from the television, it came back. He could do it again. Hillenburg's reaction was immediate and absolute. He reportedly said that he did not want to hear anybody else do the voice. We have got SpongeBob. Nickelodeon was not convinced. The network wanted to audition more actors. They had hoped to find a celebrity for the part, someone whose name would attract attention and press coverage, but Hillenburg refused. This was one of the moments where his stubbornness, his unwillingness to compromise on creative decisions that he believed were fundamental, proved decisive. Kenny has noted that one of the advantages of having a strong creator is that the creator can say, "No, I like that. I do not care about celebrities." And Hillenburg let them know in no uncertain terms that Tom Kenny was SpongeBob. Kenny has described SpongeBob's voice as somewhere between a child and an adult, invoking the names Stan Laurel and Jerry Lewis as reference points. On the podcast WTF with Mark Marone, he revealed another, more unexpected layer to the voice's origin. It was partially based on a frustrated dwarf actor he encountered while auditioning for a television commercial. The actor's high-pitched enthusiasm and barely contained exasperation found their way into SpongeBob's vocal DNA. The character's voice is, in other words, a composite of a forgotten alligator, a pair of classic comedians, and a stranger Kenny met at a cattle call. None of these sources are obvious. None of them would be guessable. And yet they produce a voice that is instantly recognizable to billions of people. To produce SpongeBob's trademark laugh, Kenny uses a physical technique. He pats his throat while vocalizing. It is not processed. It is not digitally altered. It is a man hitting himself in the neck while making noise. And the result is one of the most distinctive laughs in the history of animation. The casting crew specifically wanted SpongeBob to have an annoying laugh, in the tradition of Popeye and Woody Woodpecker. They wanted a laugh that burrowed into the listener's brain and stayed there. They got one. Over the course of the show's run, SpongeBob's voice has gradually shifted from the lower key, slightly rougher register of the early episodes to the higher, more energetic pitch that audiences associate with the character today. Kenny has acknowledged the change, but described it as unconscious. He does not wake up and think about altering the voice. It evolves on its own. The way a person's speaking voice changes over decades without any deliberate effort. The SpongeBob of 1999 and the SpongeBob of the later seasons are audibly different characters, voiced by the same man, separated by time. The other voice actors carry equally specific stories. Bill Fagerbakke, who voices Patrick Star, modeled his audition on a counterpoint to Kenny's performance. During the audition, Hillenburg played Fagerbakke, a portion of Kenny's SpongeBob recording, and asked him to find Patrick's frequency in relation to it. Patrick needed to be SpongeBob's complement, not his copy. Slower where SpongeBob is fast, lower where SpongeBob is high, denser where SpongeBob is sharp. When Patrick is angry, Fagerbakke draws on a specific and somewhat unlikely inspiration: the actress Shelley Winters. He channels her energy, her volatility, her capacity for sudden eruptions of feeling that seem to come from nowhere and overwhelm everything around them. That is Patrick in a rage. That is Shelley Winters in a cartoon octopus's body. Roger Bumpass, who voices Squidward, described the character as a very nasally, monotone kind of guy, but discovered during recording that the role was far more complex than that initial impression suggested. Squidward moves through sarcasm, frustration, genuine despair, rare moments of happiness, and what Bumpass calls apoplexy. A state of anger so intense that it short-circuits the character's ability to speak coherently. Bumpass has also contributed a specific visual detail to the show that qualifies as one of its most obscure facts. The recumbent bicycle that Squidward occasionally rides in various episodes is Bumpass's own inside joke, based on the fact that he personally owns a recumbent bicycle and rides it around Burbank, California. He told the animators about it. They drew it into the show, and it has appeared periodically ever since. Nobody in the audience knows why Squidward rides a recumbent bicycle. The answer is that his voice actor owns one. Clancy Brown, who voices Mr. Krabs, improvised the character's voice during his audition. Brown describes it as piratey, with a little Scottish brogue. According to Brown, finding the voice was not difficult. It came to him almost immediately. And the reason it came so naturally connects to one of the show's most carefully guarded origin stories. Mr. Krabs is the only character in SpongeBob SquarePants who was initially based on a specific person from Stephen Hillenburg's real life. When Hillenburg was young, he spent several summers working as a fry cook and lobster boiler at a seafood restaurant in Maine, reportedly the Islesford Dock restaurant on the Cranberry Isles, a small island community accessible only by boat. His manager at the restaurant was redheaded, muscular, and a former army cook. Those three traits were adapted directly into Krabs' character, with the character's red color standing in for the manager's red hair, his burly physique translated into the Krabs' thick arms, and his military background informing the character's authoritarian management style. The manager also spoke with a strong Maine accent, the kind of thick coastal New England speech that, to Hillenburg's ear, sounded exactly like a pirate. That accent became Mr. Krabs' voice. Clancy Brown's audition worked because the sound Hillenburg was looking for was the sound of a real person he had once known, a real man in a real restaurant on a small island off the coast of Maine. The one thing Hillenburg invented, the one quality that did not come from the real manager, was the greed. The real person was not cheap. Hillenburg added the miserliness to give the character more personality, to create a tension between Mr. Krabs' genuine warmth towards SpongeBob and his equally genuine inability to spend money on anything, ever, under any circumstances. That tension became one of the show's richest veins of comedy. Mr. Krabs loves SpongeBob. Mr. Krabs also pays SpongeBob almost nothing and charges him for the privilege of using the restaurant's amenities. Both of those things are true at the same time, and the show refuses to resolve the contradiction. Even the spelling of the character's name carries a hidden decision. When Hillenburg first created Mr. Krabs, the surname was spelled with a C. The restaurant was the Krusty Krab. Shortly before production began on the pilot, Hillenburg changed both to K's. His reasoning was simple and purely instinctive. K's were funnier and more memorable than C's. The Krusty Krab. The sound of it is sharper, stranger, more cartoonish. It pops in a way that Krusty Krab does not. And the building itself, the actual structure of the Krusty Krab restaurant, was designed after a lobster trap. The character's home, a hollow anchor, was not part of the original design. That detail was added after production on the first season had already started. The original map of Bikini Bottom that Hillenburg showed Nickelodeon executives during his 1997 pitch did not include the anchor house. Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton, was Hillenburg's first choice to audition for the show, but not for the role he ultimately received. Lawrence had worked with Hillenburg on Rocko's Modern Life, and Hillenburg invited him to read for all the characters. He was initially considered for the part of Squidward, but the chemistry did not land the way Hillenburg wanted, and he gave Lawrence the part of Plankton instead. Here is the fact that reshapes how you think about Plankton's role in the show. The character was originally meant to appear in only one episode. He was a single-use villain, designed for a standalone story, not a recurring nemesis. Nickelodeon executives wanted Hillenburg to stunt cast a celebrity for the part, hoping that a famous name would attract attention. But Hillenburg declined, preferring to keep the role with Lawrence. And Plankton grew. He grew from a one-off antagonist into the show's primary villain, from a joke character into a surprisingly complex figure whose relationship with Mr. Krabs contains genuine pathos. Lawrence's performance made that growth possible, and it only happened because Hillenburg trusted his own judgment over the network's commercial instincts. Lawrence and Jill Talley, who voices Plankton's computer wife Karen, often improvise their dialogue together during recording sessions. Lawrence has said that improvisation is his favorite part of the job, and here is a fact that consistently surprises people when they learn it. Jill Talley and Tom Kenny are married in real life. They met in 1992 while working on the comedy variety show The Edge, married in 1995, and have 2 children together. The voice of SpongeBob and the voice of Karen Plankton go home to the same house. SpongeBob's nemesis's wife is SpongeBob's actual wife. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Squidward Tentacles is, by the admission of the show's own creator, not a squid. He is an octopus. This is one of the most widely known pieces of SpongeBob trivia, but the details surrounding it are less familiar. Hillenburg confirmed Squidward's species on a special feature included on the DVD for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, introducing the character directly as Squidward the Octopus. He explained that he designed SpongeBob's grumpy next-door neighbor as an octopus, specifically because octopuses have such a large bulbous head. Squidward thinks he is an intellectual, Hillenburg continued, so of course he's going to have a large bulbous head. The character's species was chosen to match his self-image. The oversized head is not just a design choice. It is a joke about vanity, about a character who believes his brain is bigger and more important than everyone else's, and whose physical form obligingly reflects that belief. The name Squidward is a portmanteau of squid and the English name Edward. The squid was chosen for the name because it is a close relative of the octopus, and because the word squid sits more naturally in a character name than octopus does. Roger Bumpass, who voices the character, has noted that the alternative, Octoword, just did not work. It sounds wrong. It feels wrong in the mouth. Squidward sounds like a name a person could actually have, albeit an unusual one. Octoword sounds like a taxonomic classification. The choice of sound over accuracy is itself a miniature version of the larger design philosophy that governs the entire show. When given a choice between being correct and being effective, choose effective. Squidward is normally drawn with 6 limbs instead of the 8 that a real octopus would have. Hillenburg explained this as a purely practical choice. It was just simpler for animation to draw him with 6 legs instead of 8. 2 extra limbs would have meant more drawings per frame, more complex walk cycles, more opportunities for visual confusion in scenes where Squidward is moving quickly. The animators were already dealing with a character whose odd-shaped head, as writer and storyboard artist Vincent Waller has noted, made him hard to draw. Adding 2 more limbs to the equation would have compounded the difficulty. In the entire history of the show, spanning hundreds of episodes across more than 2 decades, Squidward is only shown with a full set of 8 tentacles in 2 episodes. One is the live-action sequence in the Season 2 episode Pressure. The other is a brief moment in the Season 9 episode Sold. Every other time, the show's most prominent octopus walks through life with the wrong number of limbs, and the show makes no effort to explain or justify the discrepancy. Hillenburg also considered giving Squidward the ability to eject ink, which is something real octopuses do as a defense mechanism. He ultimately retired the idea because, in his words, it always looks like he is pooping his pants. The visual was too undignified, even for a show built on physical comedy. Despite this decision, inking jokes did eventually appear in later episodes, including Giant Squidward and the notably controversial Ink Lemonade, which built an entire plot around Squidward's ink production. The sound of Squidward's footsteps, that distinctive suction cup on tile sound that follows him through every scene, is produced by a specific physical technique, rubbing hot water bottles together. The footsteps of every main character in SpongeBob SquarePants are recorded by the show's Foley crew, supervised by sound designer Jeff Hutchins, and each character has a distinct audio signature. SpongeBob's feet squeak when he walks. Patrick's feet make a heavier, flatter sound. Squidward's feet suction. These sounds are consistent across episodes, and they create a layer of characterization that operates entirely below the threshold of conscious attention. A listener absorbs them without analyzing them. They become part of how the character feels, not just how the character looks or sounds. And then there is the matter of Hillenburg's creative convictions, the battles he fought with the network that shaped the show into what it became and protected it from what it could have become. When Nickelodeon commissioned the full series after seeing the pilot, they attached a condition that could have destroyed the show before it began. SpongeBob had to be a child who went to school. The network's reasoning was purely commercial. Their most successful shows at the time, including Hey Arnold and Rugrats, featured young protagonists in school settings. The formula worked. The ratings proved it. One executive reportedly described what they wanted as Arnold from Hey Arnold, Under the Sea. They wanted to replicate a proven model, and they wanted Hillenburg to bend his creation to fit it. Hillenburg was prepared to walk away from the deal. His vision was specific and non-negotiable on this point. SpongeBob was an adult, not a child pretending to be an adult, not an adult who acted like a child, an adult who happened to have a childlike spirit, living an adult life, holding down a job, paying for things, maintaining a house, navigating a world that did not always accommodate his enthusiasm. The distinction mattered to Hillenburg because it was the source of the show's emotional core. Making SpongeBob a schoolchild would have removed the fundamental tension that drives the entire series. The gap between SpongeBob's boundless optimism and the grinding, repetitive, sometimes soul-crushing reality of adult life in a service economy. That gap is where the comedy lives. It is also where the sadness lives. And it is the reason the show resonates with adults in a way that a show about a child sponge attending underwater elementary school never could. Hillenburg compromised, but he did it on his terms. Instead of turning SpongeBob into a child, he created a new character, Mrs. Puff, a pufferfish who runs a boating school. SpongeBob could attend school as an adult, learning to drive a boat, perpetually failing his driving test, without surrendering his adult identity. Hillenburg was satisfied with the compromise because it brought in a new character who became one of the show's richest sources of comedy, and a quiet, ongoing study of a teacher's despair. Mrs. Puff is a professional educator who has been teaching the same student the same skill for years, and that student has never improved. She has not quit. She has not given up. But she has been fundamentally broken by the experience. That is not a children's story. That is a very specific piece of adult horror, played for laughs, hiding inside a show about a sponge. The Mrs. Puff compromise is also, quietly, one of the most revealing facts about Hillenburg's relationship with Nickelodeon. He was willing to fight. He was willing to walk away from a deal that most animators would have accepted without hesitation. But he was also willing to negotiate, to find a solution that gave the network what it wanted: a school setting, while preserving what he needed: an adult protagonist. That balance between conviction and flexibility is visible throughout the show's production history. Hillenburg was not a dictator. He was not a pushover. He was a person who knew which battles mattered and which ones could be conceded without losing anything essential. The boating school episodes became a beloved part of the series. Mrs. Puff became a fan favorite, and SpongeBob remained an adult. Everyone got what they needed, and the show was better for the tension that produced the solution. There is another detail about SpongeBob's adult identity that is easy to overlook, but impossible to unsee once you notice it. SpongeBob lives alone. He owns his home. He has a pet. He goes to work every day at a job he loves, performs that job with extraordinary skill, and receives almost no recognition or compensation for it. He has a best friend who is not a colleague, but a neighbor, a person he chose rather than a person he was assigned to by circumstance. His relationship with his parents is warm but distant. They appear occasionally. They care about him, but they do not live with him. His daily life is structured around labor, routine, and the small pleasures that make routine bearable. This is not a child's life. This is an adult's life. And the show's comedy comes not from the absurdity of a child in an adult world, but from the much more unsettling absurdity of an adult who finds genuine joy in a life that, by most external measures, should be unremarkable. SpongeBob is happy at the Krusty Krab. Most people who have worked in food service know that the Krusty Krab is not a place where happiness should be possible. That gap between SpongeBob's experience and the audience's knowledge of what that experience should feel like is where the show does its deepest work. The writing process behind SpongeBob SquarePants is unlike almost any other show on television. Unlike most animated series, SpongeBob does not use written scripts. Instead, storylines are developed by a small team of outline and premise writers who produce a 2-page outline for each episode. That outline is then handed to a team of storyboard directors, who produce a complete rough draft of the storyboard. Most of the dialogue and jokes are added during this storyboarding stage, not before it. Writer and storyboard artist Luke Brookshire has compared this process to how cartoons were made in the early days of animation, before the script-driven model became dominant in the television industry. Rocko's Modern Life had used the same storyboard-driven approach, and Hillenburg felt strongly about carrying it forward into SpongeBob, even as Nickelodeon was beginning to show a preference for script-driven cartoons, which are easier for network executives to review and approve in advance. The storyboard method has a specific consequence for the show's creative texture. It gives individual artists far more control over the rhythm, pacing, visual gags, and tonal register of each episode than a script-driven process would allow. A script tells an artist what to draw. A storyboard lets the artist decide what to draw, guided by an outline, but not constrained by it. This means that the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants is not the product of a single writer's room reaching consensus on every joke. It is the product of dozens of visual storytellers working in parallel, each bringing their own sensibility to their assigned episodes. The tonal variation between episodes, the way one can feel distinctly different from the next, even within the same season, is a direct result of this process. The writing staff drew heavily on their own lives for episode ideas, and some of the show's most famous episodes trace back to specific personal experiences that the writers brought into the room. This is not unusual in television writing. What is unusual is the directness of the connection. Most shows filter personal experience through layers of abstraction, transforming a real memory into a fictional scenario that bears only a structural resemblance to the original event. SpongeBob's writers often skipped the abstraction entirely. They took their memories and put them directly into the show, changing the names and the species, but keeping everything else. The Season 2 episode Sailor Mouth, in which SpongeBob and Patrick discover a profane word written on a dumpster and begin using it enthusiastically in every sentence, was inspired by creative director Derek Dryman's childhood experience of getting into trouble for saying the F word in front of his mother. Hillenburg has described the premise as a classic thing all kids go through. Dryman has said that the scene where Patrick runs to Mr. Krabs to tattle, with SpongeBob chasing him, is pretty much how it happened in real life. The chase scene in the episode, the desperate sprint across Bikini Bottom, with one character trying to reach the authority figure before the other, is not an invented scenario. It is a memory. Drymon running through his house as a child, trying to beat his sibling to their mother, has been transplanted into an underwater city and performed by a starfish and a sponge. The end of the episode, where Mr. Krabs uses even more profanity than SpongeBob and Patrick combined, was inspired by the fact that Drymon's mother had, in his words, a sailor mouth herself. The episode is not a satire of profanity. It is a reproduction of a specific childhood experience, played at a different speed and in a different key. The production of Sailor Mouth involved a creative challenge that Hillenburg solved with a characteristically unconventional approach. He initially pitched the concept to his team, and the response was flat refusal. The network would not allow a children's show to feature profanity, even bleeped profanity. A standard bleep was too close to the real thing. So Hillenburg proposed replacing the bleeps with dolphin sounds and with other marine animal noises for the other 12 bad words on Mr. Krabs' list. The substitution worked because it preserved the comedy of the situation, the escalating absurdity of characters using language they do not understand, while removing any direct reference to actual profanity. The dolphin sound became the joke, not the word it was replacing. The censor itself became the comedy. The recording session for Sailor Mouth carries its own piece of hidden history. Tom Kenny revealed in the iTunes collection Tom Kenny's Top 20 that the voice actors actually improvised real profanities during the recording, with the understanding that the words would later be replaced by the animal sound effects. The suggestion reportedly came from Kenny himself, who asked the studio if they could just cuss and have the sound team bleep it out afterward. When the studio gave the green light, Clancy Brown, the voice of Mr. Krabs, warmed to the opportunity with particular enthusiasm. Kenny described it as one of the hardest episodes he ever had to record, because listening to Patrick and Squidward and Mr. Krabs genuinely cursing was so funny that he could not stop laughing. He has said that at one point, the recording engineers captured him lying on the floor of the sound booth, unable to stand, while the other actors continued performing around him. Kenny has also stated that the uncensored recordings, the raw audio of the full SpongeBob voice, cast dropping real profanity in character, may be the funniest thing in the world, and also something the public will never be allowed to hear, ever. He suspects Nickelodeon has the recordings buried deep in a pit in the middle of the earth somewhere. Whether those recordings still exist is unknown. The show's sound archives are not publicly accessible, but the fact that they were made at all reveals something important about the culture of the SpongeBob recording studio during its early years. Hillenburg encouraged ad-libbing. He encouraged actors to mess around, to push scenes beyond the storyboard, to try things that nobody had planned. And the show's voice recordings were done with the full cast in the room at the same time, a rarity in animation, where actors typically record their lines in isolation. This ensemble recording method gave the performances a conversational energy, a sense of real interaction that isolated recordings cannot replicate. Drymon's personal experiences fueled other episodes beyond Sailor Mouth. The Season 2 episode The Secret Box, in which SpongeBob becomes consumed with curiosity about the contents of Patrick's secret box, was inspired by the fact that Drymon kept a secret box as a child. He told the writing staff about it during a brainstorming session, and they found it hilarious and strange. It became an episode. The pilot itself, Help Wanted, had its plot based on an experience Hillenburg had during his years in the Boy Scouts. And Hillenburg's original concept for the series pitch, before he settled on the job application premise, was inspired by the 1989 film Pow Wow Highway. He had imagined the pitch revolving around SpongeBob and Squidward going on a road trip together, an odd couple thrown into proximity by circumstance. That concept was scrapped for the pilot, but was later recycled as the premise for the Season 1 episode Pizza Delivery, in which SpongeBob and Squidward must deliver a pizza across Bikini Bottom and end up lost, stranded, and at each other's throats. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The animation of SpongeBob SquarePants has gone through more technical transformations than most viewers realize, and each one left a visible mark on the show's appearance that careful viewers can identify. During the first season, the series used traditional cell animation. This is the oldest method of producing animated television, the process where each frame is hand-drawn on transparent celluloid sheets, which are then layered over painted backgrounds and photographed one frame at a time. The first season of SpongeBob has a specific visual warmth that comes from this process, a slightly rough, organic quality that digital animation does not fully replicate. The lines have a thickness that varies naturally. The colors have a richness that comes from physical paint. The imperfections, the tiny inconsistencies between frames, the occasional wobble of a line, or the faint shadow of a misregistered layer are part of the texture. They are not mistakes. They are the fingerprints of human hands. Starting with the second season, the show shifted to digital ink and paint animation. The drawings were still done by hand, still created by artists with pencils and paper, but the coloring and compositing moved to computers. The shift was part of a broader industry trend that saw nearly every major animated series abandon cell animation in favor of digital workflows between the late 1990s and early 2000s. For most viewers, the difference between the first season and the second is subtle, but animators and fans with a trained eye can see it. The lines become slightly cleaner. The colors become slightly more uniform. The handmade imperfections of cell animation disappear, replaced by the precision of digital tools. A more significant change came with the fifth season. Starting with the episode Pest of the West, which aired in 2008, the crew began using digital drawing tablets, which allowed them to draw directly on computer screens and make immediate changes or undo mistakes. Background designer Kenny Pittenger noted that many of his colleagues did not like the tablets and preferred the immediacy and tactile feedback of drawing on paper. The transition was gradual and not universally welcomed within the production team, but it eventually became the standard working method. Each of these technical transitions is invisible to most viewers, but collectively they explain why SpongeBob looks subtly different from season to season, why the early episodes have a quality that later episodes do not, and why fans who grew up with the first 3 seasons often describe the show's visual identity in terms that are as much about texture as about design. The animation itself was not produced in Burbank. The California crew at Nickelodeon Animation Studio created the storyboards and all of the creative materials, but the labor-intensive process of actually animating each scene, drawing each frame, was carried out at Rough Draft Korea, an animation studio in Seoul, South Korea. This is a common arrangement in American animation and has been for decades. The domestic studio handles the creative vision, the editorial oversight, and the quality control. The overseas partner handles the frame-by-frame production. The Rough Draft team would receive the storyboards from California, animate each scene by hand, color each frame on computers, and paint the backgrounds. The final stages of production, including editing, sound design, and adding music, were completed back in California. The relationship between the Burbank team and the Seoul team is one of the most underappreciated aspects of how SpongeBob SquarePants gets made. The storyboards produced in California are detailed, but they are not animation. They are instructions. They tell the Korean team what each scene should look like, how the characters should move, what the timing should feel like. But the Korean animators are the ones who turn those instructions into fluid motion. They are the ones who give SpongeBob's walk its specific bounce, who make Squidward's tentacles move with that particular weighted drag, who render the water effects and the bubble transitions, and the thousands of small details that make Bikini Bottom feel like a real place. The show's visual identity is a collaboration between 2 teams on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean, working in different time zones, communicating through drawings rather than words, producing something that neither team could have made alone. For the first 3 seasons, the voice recording sessions were directed by Steven Hillenburg and Derek Dryman. They stood in the booth with the actors, guiding performances, encouraging improvisation, pushing for takes that went beyond what the storyboard specified. Starting with the 4th season, after Hillenburg's departure, the voice directing was handled by Andrea Romano, a veteran voice director known for her work on Batman, the animated series, and numerous other productions. Romano brought a different energy to the sessions, more structured, more efficient, but also more distant from the show's original creative DNA. When the 9th season began, Tom Kenny himself took over as voice director, bringing the guidance back inside the cast. Kenny has been directing the voice sessions since then, which means that the voice of SpongeBob is also the person telling the voice of Squidward how to deliver a line. The layers of creative authority within the SpongeBob production are nested inside each other like Russian dolls. Since 2004, the SpongeBob crew has also periodically collaborated with Screen Novelties, a Los Angeles-based animation studio specializing in stop motion, to create special sequences for notable episodes. Screen Novelties produced a brief claymation scene for the climax of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. They later produced an opening sequence for the series' 10th anniversary special in 2009. These collaborations represent another layer of the show's visual ambition, its willingness to break format, to interrupt the familiar two-dimensional animation with something completely different, something tactile and physical, as if reminding the audience that Bikini Bottom is not just a place on a screen, but an idea that can exist in any medium. Almost every episode of SpongeBob SquarePants is divided into two 11-minute segments. This was Hillenburg's decision, rooted in a specific creative belief that SpongeBob works better in short form than in long form. The 11-minute format forces compression. It demands that every scene earn its place, that every joke land quickly, that the emotional arc resolve before the audience has time to disengage. Hillenburg understood, from his years as a teacher, that attention is finite. 11 minutes is long enough to tell a story with real weight. It is short enough that the story never outstays its welcome. The few episodes that deviate from this format, the half-hour specials and the TV movies, tend to expand outward into spectacle rather than inward into depth, which was the opposite of what Hillenburg valued most. The creative staff who passed through SpongeBob's production during its first 3 seasons went on to shape the entire landscape of American animation in ways that are still visible today. Dan Povenmire, who served as a writer and storyboard director on the show, co-wrote some of its most beloved episodes, including Graveyard Shift, The Fry Cook Games, and SpongeBob, Sandy, and the Worm. He also wrote the Campfire Song for the camping episode, which aired on April 3rd, 2004. The song's instrumental was performed by Povenmire's own band, Keep Left. In a 2020 TikTok video, Povenmire revealed that Patrick's role in the song was different in his original draft. Patrick was supposed to say the word letters, letters, letters during the part where SpongeBob spells out the word campfire at increasing speed. His writing partner at the time, Jay Linder, suggested changing it so that Patrick tries and fails to keep up with SpongeBob's spelling. Povenmire admits it was funnier that way. According to the Tom Kenny collection, Kenny performed the sped-up version of the song entirely in real time during the recording session. It was not edited to be fast. It was purely Tom Kenny singing at that speed in one take. After leaving SpongeBob, Povenmire spent roughly 12 years pitching a show called Phineas and Ferb to multiple networks, including Cartoon Network, Fox Kids, and Nickelodeon, all of which rejected it. Disney initially rejected the pitch as well, but asked to keep the proposal packet. They eventually picked the series up. The co-creator of one of Disney Channel's most successful animated series of the 2000s cut his teeth writing episodes about a sponge and a starfish attending a fry cooking competition. Derek Dryman, SpongeBob's creative director for the first 3 seasons, went on to become an executive producer on Adventure Time for Cartoon Network. Kent Osborne, who wrote for SpongeBob during the same period, also moved to Adventure Time. The creative pipeline that began with Rocko's Modern Life in 1993 flowed through SpongeBob SquarePants starting in 1999, and then branched out into Adventure Time, Phineas and Ferb, and dozens of other series, is one of the most productive talent networks in the history of television animation. It is not an exaggeration to say that the aesthetic sensibility of American animation in the first 2 decades of the 21st century was, to a significant degree, shaped by people who learned their craft on a show about a sponge who lives in a pineapple. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The French narrator who introduces many episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants is a character most viewers accept without question. He speaks with a French accent. He sounds like a documentary narrator. He treats the underwater world with the same reverent curiosity that a nature documentarian would bring to a real ecosystem, noting the habits and behaviors of the characters as if they were wild animals being observed in their natural habitat. And this is not an accident or a stylistic quirk. The French narrator is a direct, intentional parody of Jacques-Yves Cousteau, the legendary French oceanographer and filmmaker whose documentaries about marine life defined an entire genre of nature programming, and who Hillenburg watched with devotion as a child growing up in Anaheim. Cousteau's voice, his measured cadence, his way of treating every marine organism as something worthy of wonder and scientific attention became the template for SpongeBob's narrator. The parody is affectionate, not mocking. It is the kind of tribute that can only come from genuine admiration. ocean, and the connection is not merely implicit. On the DVD for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, Jacques Cousteau's son, Jean-Michel Cousteau, appears in a special feature. The Cousteau family is directly, explicitly linked to SpongeBob SquarePants through a formal collaboration that acknowledged the inspiration. Bikini Bottom, the underwater city where SpongeBob lives, is named after a real place. Bikini Atoll is an island in the Marshall Islands, in the Pacific Ocean, where the United States conducted nuclear weapons tests between 1946 and 1958. 23 nuclear devices were detonated at the atoll during that period. The show has referenced Bikini Bottom's location in the Pacific Ocean among the Marshall Islands on several occasions, and the island that appears in the opening sequence is explicitly identified as Bikini Atoll. Tom Kenny confirmed in 2015 that the city is indeed named after the real atoll. This geographical specificity has given rise to one of the most persistent and widely debated fan theories in the show's history, that the characters of SpongeBob SquarePants are radioactive mutants, the result of nuclear contamination from the bomb tests. The theory has been discussed in online forums, articles, and videos for years. Kenny has addressed it directly, debunking it by noting that the name is simply a geographical reference, not a narrative explanation. The characters are not mutants. The bombs are not part of the lore. But the theory persists, and it persists for a reason that has less to do with SpongeBob specifically, and more to do with how audiences engage with fiction. People want explanations for strangeness, and Bikini Bottom is very strange. The talking animals, the fire underwater, the weather patterns in the absence of atmosphere, the existence of a beach at the bottom of the ocean. All of these things demand explanation, and the nuclear theory provides one, even if it is wrong. The Krabby Patty, the signature sandwich of the Krusty Krab, has generated its own mythology within the show and among its audience. A mythology that is remarkable precisely because it revolves around the absence of information rather than its presence. One of the most frequently asked questions about SpongeBob SquarePants, across decades of fan discussion and speculation, is what the secret formula actually contains. The answer, according to multiple members of the production team, is that the formula is deliberately undefined. It is not a secret being withheld from the audience. It is a void. There is nothing inside the vault. The mystery is the point. Vincent Waller, a writer and storyboard artist who later became co-showrunner, has stated unambiguously that there is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty. There is no animal product in there. This was always planned by Hillenburg, who, as a former marine biologist and lifelong advocate for ocean conservation, did not want his show to depict fish being eaten as food. Mr. Lawrence, the voice of Plankton, has confirmed that the writers are not allowed to depict fish as food in the show. The only place in Bikini Bottom that serves anything approximating meat is the chum bucket, and the chum there is consistently depicted as disgusting and inedible. In 2019, Waller was asked whether the secret formula would ever be revealed. He said he would not count on it. He then added that Hillenburg, who had died the previous year, was the only person to have ever seen the formula. If that is true, then the Krabby Patty's secret formula is not a mystery waiting to be solved. It is a secret that died with its creator, sealed away forever. The one piece of SpongeBob SquarePants that belongs entirely to Steven Hillenburg and will never belong to anyone else. The cultural footprint of SpongeBob SquarePants extends so far beyond the television screen that cataloging it becomes an exercise in documenting a phenomenon that has no clear boundary. In 2002, 3 years after the show premiered, SpongeBob SquarePants dolls were selling at a rate of 75,000 per week, a pace that outstripped even Tickle Me Elmo dolls at their peak. The show became enormously popular in Japan, specifically among women, a demographic that Nickelodeon's parent company Viacom deliberately targeted with its marketing strategy. Skeptics initially doubted that SpongeBob could succeed in Japan, where character design tastes were shaped by the smooth, rounded aesthetics of Hello Kitty and Pikachu. SpongeBob is angular, loud, and visually chaotic by comparison. The skeptics were wrong. The show found its audience. The show's reach into unexpected corners of the culture is staggering in its scope. Hillenburg himself was uncomfortable with certain aspects of the merchandising explosion. He has been quoted saying that his biggest nightmare was finding SpongeBob merchandise washed up on a beach, since he was a former marine biologist and did not want to contribute to ocean pollution. That statement contains a painful irony. The man who created SpongeBob SquarePants to make children care about the ocean was, by the mid-2000s, watching his character become exactly the kind of consumer product that ends up in the ocean as waste. The sponge that was supposed to represent love for marine life had become, in its physical merchandise form, a potential threat to it. Hillenburg could not stop the merchandising. The franchise was owned by Nickelodeon, and Nickelodeon was owned by Viacom. And Viacom's interest was commercial, not conservational. But the fact that Hillenburg articulated this concern publicly, that he named the specific nightmare of his own creation harming the ecosystem he had spent his career trying to protect, tells you everything about who he was and what the show meant to him beyond its success. Hillenburg did maintain one specific rule regarding promotional tie-ins with fast food brands. Whenever SpongeBob appeared in connection with a fast food product, Hillenburg insisted that the character was not allowed to directly interact with any of the food being sold. The character could appear on the packaging. He could be part of the advertisement, but he could not be shown eating or endorsing the product. Hillenburg told the New York Times that they did not want to suddenly become the people serving up food that is not that good for you, especially kids. The distinction is subtle, almost invisible to the consumer, but it mattered to Hillenburg. It was a line he drew, a small piece of control he maintained over a character that had otherwise been absorbed into the machinery of global merchandising. In 2011, American mycologists Dennis Desjardins, Kabir P.A., and Thomas Bruns discovered a new species of fungus in Lambir Hills National Park in Malaysia. The fungus had spongy, irregular fruit bodies and a musty smell. Analysis revealed that it belonged to the genus Spongiforma, and the scientists named it Spongiforma squarepantsii, after SpongeBob SquarePants. They explained that the spongy fruit bodies of the fungus resembled SpongeBob's body, and that its spore-bearing surface reminded them of a seafloor covered with tube sponges. A character created by a marine biologist, based on an educational comic about tide pool animals, became the namesake of an actual biological organism discovered in a tropical forest on the other side of the world. The distance between the intertidal zone and Spongiforma squarepantsii is the distance between a teaching tool and a scientific legacy. By 2024, the SpongeBob SquarePants franchise had generated over $16 billion in merchandising revenue. The show has won 6 Annie Awards, 8 Golden Reel Awards, 4 Emmy Awards, 2 BAFTA Children's Awards, and a record 22 Kids' Choice Awards. It is the 4th longest-running American animated series in history, and the longest-running American children's animated series. Hillenburg, who once told an interviewer that he really figured they might get a season and a cult following, and that might be it, lived to see his show become the most profitable property in Nickelodeon's entire history. He did not live to see the 16th season, which premiered in 2025. He did not live to see the spin-off series, Camp Corral, and The Patrick Star Show that Nickelodeon launched after his death. Decisions that drew public criticism from former showrunner Paul Tibbitt, who believed that creating spin-offs went against Hillenburg's wishes for the property. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, released on November 19, 2004, was intended by Hillenburg to be the series finale. He had halted production of the television show in 2002 to work on the film, and he designed its story as a conclusion. The film was directed by Hillenburg and written by him alongside Derek Dryman, Tim Hill, Kent Osborne, Aaron Springer, and Paul Tibbitt. Gregor Narholtz composed the score. The cast included guest appearances by Jeffrey Tambor as King Neptune, Scarlett Johansson as Princess Mindy, Alec Baldwin as the bounty hunter Dennis, and David Hasselhoff as himself. The film grossed over $140 million worldwide, and it ends with Ocean Man by Ween playing over the closing credits, a direct, deliberate link back to the album that helped inspire the show's creation 7 years earlier. But SpongeBob was too valuable to end. Nickelodeon wanted more episodes. The show was the network's most profitable franchise. The merchandising revenue alone was generating billions. Hillenburg resigned as showrunner. He appointed Paul Tibbitt, who had been a writer, director, and storyboard artist on the series, to take his place. Hillenburg considered Tibbitt one of his favorite crew members and deeply trusted him. The handover was not hostile. It was not a firing or a corporate maneuver. It was a creator stepping back from a creation he loved because he believed the story he wanted to tell was finished, and the network disagreed. Although Hillenburg no longer had a direct role in the series' day-to-day production, he maintained an advisory role and reviewed each episode before it aired. He also continued to be credited as executive producer on every subsequent season, a credit that was maintained even after his death. The show continued without him. It changed. Fans and critics widely noted a shift in tone and quality, beginning with the 4th season, the first produced entirely without Hillenburg's direct involvement. The characters became broader. The humor became louder. The subtle emotional register that had defined the first 3 seasons, the ability to be genuinely sad and genuinely funny in the same 11-minute segment, became harder to find. Whether this was the result of Hillenburg's absence, the natural entropy of a long-running series, or simply the audience's own nostalgia coloring their perception, is a question that has been debated for 2 decades and will probably never be resolved. What is not debated is that something changed. The show that returned after the first movie was not the same show that had gone into hibernation before it. Hillenburg himself was aware of the criticism. He maintained his advisory role precisely because he wanted to protect the show's integrity, even from a distance. And in December 2014, a decade after stepping away, it was announced that Hillenburg would return to the series in an unspecified position. The announcement generated excitement among fans who believed his return would restore the show to the creative standard of its first 3 seasons, which are widely considered the series' peak. The return was real. Hillenburg came back. He was involved again. And then, in March 2017, he publicly disclosed that he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects the neurons controlling voluntary movement. There is no cure. There is no effective treatment. The diagnosis is, in almost every case, terminal. He stated that he would continue to work on SpongeBob for as long as he was able. He released a statement saying that anyone who knows him knows that he will continue to work on SpongeBob SquarePants and his other passions for as long as he is able. He kept that promise. On November 26, 2018, at the age of 57, Steven Hillenburg died of complications from the disease. He had been working on the show until the end. His remains were cremated, and his ashes were scattered off the coast of Los Angeles County, returned to the ocean that had shaped his entire life. The response to his death was immediate and global. Nickelodeon confirmed via social media that the series would continue. Incoming network president Brian Robbins vowed that Nickelodeon would keep SpongeBob in production for as long as the network exists. The show's current showrunners, Vincent Waller and Mark Ceccarelli, had previously served as writers and storyboard directors during the series' earlier seasons. Dean Ween posted a tribute on Facebook. Tom Kenny spoke publicly about the loss of a colleague he had worked with for over 2 decades. The internet filled with screenshots of SpongeBob episodes, shared without commentary, as if the images themselves were a language adequate to the grief that the words were not. Hillenburg was a private man. He did not give many interviews. He did not appear at industry events with regularity. He did not maintain a public social media presence. He did not seek the spotlight that his creation generated. And when the spotlight found him anyway, he stepped out of it as quickly as he could. Tom Kenny's joke about the lips in the Painty the Pirate painting being the closest fans would ever come to seeing Hillenburg was not entirely a joke. Hillenburg was, by choice, invisible. He built the show. He shaped every detail of its world. He fought for its creative integrity against network executives who wanted to change it. He chose the music. He chose the voices. He chose the color of the protagonist's pants. And then he stepped back, as far back as a person can step, while still being credited on every episode, and let the work exist on its own. That is a specific kind of artistic temperament. It is the temperament of someone who believes that the work is more important than the person who made it, that the creation should outlive the creator, not as a monument to the creator's ego, but as a thing in the world that belongs to everyone who encounters it. There is a detail about Hillenburg's death that rarely appears in the standard accounts, but that connects to everything else. He voiced a character on the show, not SpongeBob, not any of the main cast. Hillenburg provided the original voice of Potty the Parrot, the puppet companion to Tom Kenny's live-action character, Patchy the Pirate. After Hillenburg's departure from the show as showrunner in 2004, Paul Tibbitt took over the role. But in the early special episodes, the squawking, abrasive voice of the parrot belongs to the show's creator. He is hidden in that voice, the same way he is hidden in the lips of the pirate painting, present, performing, contributing, but unnamed, uncredited in the way that matters to the public, invisible inside his own creation. On November 18th, 2021, a memorial bench and historical plaque were dedicated at his alma mater, Savannah High School in Anaheim, California. The project was a collaboration between the Hillenburg family, the Anaheim Historical Society, and YouTube personality Griffin Hansen. Karen Hillenburg, Steven's wife, specifically chose a bright yellow bench that she thought perfectly captured her husband's warmth and goofiness. The dedication took place one day before the school's 60th anniversary at a school-wide assembly. The event was attended by members of the SpongeBob voice cast, including Tom Kenny, Jill Talley, Roger Bumpass, Bill Fagerbakke, Clancy Brown, and Mr. Lawrence. The people who had given voice to his characters stood in the place where he had once been a student and honored the man who had made their careers possible. The bench is yellow. It sits outside a high school in a suburb of Los Angeles. And it is, in its own small way, exactly the kind of memorial Hillenburg would have chosen for himself. Bright, unpretentious, functional, and available to anyone who wants to sit down. There is a tendency, when talking about SpongeBob SquarePants, to frame the show's depth as a surprise, as if it is remarkable that a cartoon about a sponge flipping burgers has something to say about loneliness, about the dignity of service work, about the way cheerfulness can be both a gift and a cage, about the specific sadness of being an adult who has not outgrown the capacity for wonder in a world that insists you should. But the depth was never hidden. It was never a secret. It was the point. It was always the point. Hillenburg built the show on a foundation of real experience. He worked as a fry cook. He taught children. He studied the organisms that live in the space between land and sea. He loved the ocean deeply enough to spend years learning its rhythms. And he loved animation deeply enough to spend years learning its language. And the show he made is the place where those two loves met. Consider the shape of his career for a moment. He was born in an army town in Oklahoma. He grew up in Anaheim. He studied marine science. He taught children about tide pools. He drew a comic book that nobody wanted to publish. He enrolled in animation school. He met Joe Murray at a festival. He worked on Rocco's Modern Life. He heard an album by Ween. He built a terrarium and put on a Hawaiian shirt. He pitched a show to executives who laughed so hard they had to leave the room. He fought a network that wanted to turn his adult character into a child. He solved the problem by inventing a boating school. He named a restaurant after a letter of the alphabet because K's are funnier than C's. He designed a building after a lobster trap and a character after a man with red hair and a Maine accent. He hid his own lips inside a thrift store painting and put it at the beginning of every episode. He created a show that became the most profitable property in the history of its network, generated over $16 billion in merchandise, inspired a species of fungus to be named after it, and was still running a quarter century after its debut. And then he died at 57 from a disease that took away his ability to move while leaving his mind intact. The facts are the story, not because the facts are interesting, although they are, because the facts reveal a pattern that no summary can capture. Every decision Hillenburg made, from the square shape of the sponge, to the spelling of the crab's name, to the choice of Hawaiian music for the pitch meeting, was the same decision made at different scales. It was the decision to trust his own instincts over the expectations of the industry he worked in. He was not rebellious. He was not confrontational. He was simply certain, in the quiet way that people who have spent years studying tide pools are certain, that he knew what he was looking at, and that the people around him did not yet see it. The facts that make up SpongeBob's history, the 100 small details that accumulate across more than 25 years of production, are not trivia in the way that word is usually meant. They are not pieces of information to be memorized and recited at parties. They are evidence. Evidence of a show that was made by people who cared about what they were making, who fought for their vision when the network wanted to change it, who turned a trademark dispute into a better name, who turned a union fee into a silent episode, who turned a thrift store painting into the opening shot of a global phenomenon, who recorded real profanity in a Nickelodeon studio and covered it with dolphin sounds because the joke was worth the trouble, who built a terrarium and put on Hawaiian shirts because they believed the only way to sell a cartoon about a sponge was to make the executives laugh so hard they had to leave the room. The show Hillenburg left behind is still running. New episodes are still being produced. New characters are still being introduced. The voice cast still records together, in the same room, the way they always have. SpongeBob still goes to work at the Krusty Krab every morning. He still loves his job. He still treats every Krabby Patty as if it matters. He still does not understand why Squidward is unhappy, even though the audience, watching from the outside, understands perfectly. That is the gap the show lives in. That is the space between the slapstick and the sadness. The space Hillenburg found when he was a young man standing by a tide pool in Dana Point, watching a sponge cling to a rock and wondering what its life was like when nobody was looking. SpongeBob SquarePants is a show about a creature who lives in a pineapple under the sea and goes to work every day at a restaurant shaped like a lobster trap, managed by a crab whose voice was inspired by a real man in Maine with a strong accent and red hair, scored by music that comes partly from a 60-year-old library of Hawaiian steel guitar recordings, and partly from a collective of unknown musicians who call themselves the Sponge Divers Orchestra, created by a marine science educator who pitched the show in a Hawaiian shirt with character models inside a terrarium. He wheeled into a conference room, voiced by an actor who found the character's voice in a minor role he performed once on a different show, forgot completely, and only recovered when the show's creator played him a video clip. Every fact connects to every other fact. Every detail was chosen by someone who believed it mattered. Nothing about this show is accidental. And that is perhaps the most obscure fact of all, that in a show this strange, this anarchic, this seemingly effortless, every single element was deliberate. Every sound, every color, every footstep, every name. The sponge was always telling you who he was. You just had to listen. And now that you have heard the 100 facts, the 100 small truths that hold the show together like stitches in a seam, the listening is different. The next time the theme song plays, you will hear a sea shanty adapted from Blow the Man Down. You will see lips that belong to a marine biologist from Anaheim. You will hear a voice that was found in a forgotten alligator on a canceled show about a wallaby. You will watch a character walk into a building shaped like a lobster trap, designed by a man who once worked as a fry cook in Maine, and you will know that the building, the character, the voice, the music, the name, and the painting of the pirate are all connected by a single thread that runs from an unpublished comic book about tide pool animals to the most successful animated franchise in the history of children's television. The thread is Steven Hillenburg. The thread is a teacher who wanted his students to care about what lived under the surface. The thread held. It is still holding. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.